I have a little horsey throat this morning, and I'm always quiet spoken, so I hope everyone can hear me okay. It's my pleasure to be with you today and to bring to you two very experienced gentlemen with great expertise in forecasting, modeling, preparedness, and emergency response. And we did have two interesting storms this year that they can actually speak about, in addition to talking about some other things with you. Our first speaker is Dr. Rick Knabb. He's the director of NOAA's National Hurricane Center. He holds a bachelor's degree in atmospheric science from Purdue University, and he holds his graduate degrees, including a doctorate from Florida State University, go Noles. He, prior to directing the National Hurricane Center, worked with the National Hurricane Center before. Some of you may know that and may remember him from prior work he did there, but he has also worked with Risk Management Solutions and has worked with the Weather Channel, among other positions he's held. So thank you for being here, Rick. We also have with us Director Brian Kuhn from the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Brian holds an undergraduate degree in natural resources from Cornell University. He also holds a graduate degree, an MBA from the George Washington University, as well as a graduate certificate from there in emergency and crisis management. Most of you know he came to Florida to direct the Division of Emergency Management in 2012, or 2011 actually, 2011, and had worked with Walmart previously as operations manager and director of emergency management there. A lot of people don't know that he was also a U.S. naval officer and spent a period of time working with the White House military office on presidential contingency plans, among other things. So, as I said, both of these gentlemen come to us with great experience, great expertise. I'm happy to have them with us today. I'm going to let Rick speak first, Brian follow, and then we'll have question answer afterward for all of you. I will note that both of them have pretty tight schedules. I'm not sure how much later they can stay today after our session. They are both trying to stay for a while with us, but any questions you can get in at the end of the session, please do, because I'm not sure how long they can be with us. So Rick, I'll let you start.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to take a little bit of time here to show you some visual aids, because there are a lot of things that are changing at the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service when it comes to our hurricane products and our warnings. I've been the director for 5 years now, and during my tenure, we've been through a pretty aggressive period of changing our products and our warnings and our services to meet the needs of partners like Brian and the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Emergency managers at federal, state, and local levels all around the country, our media partners, and ultimately we're trying to serve the public. And everyone's needs are evolving. And in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of tropical storms and hurricanes affecting the U.S., but no major hurricanes, Category 3 or stronger on our wind scale. But what we have been seeing is major impacts, mostly due to water, whether it's storm surge, the salt water from the ocean coming onto normally dry ground, or it is the heavy rainfall causing inland flooding, and a lot of devastation, and both have caused loss of life, including in 2016. So that's really the main motivation for what we are changing. Now, why is this important to you? Why have I been spending so much more time talking to folks in the insurance communities around the country? It's because we want to make sure that, to whatever extent, how we define things, how we classify things operationally, where we put the warnings and when and what kinds of warnings, and how we classify things after the fact in our official reports at the end of the season. To whatever extent what you do is predicated on that, we wanted to make sure you're aware of the changes we are making so that you are ahead of the game in responding to those changes and incorporating them into your line of work. So again, the primary reason for our changes and for what we do operationally is for the protection of life and property in real time, but we realize that what we do affects a lot of folks, including many of you. So this is a brief overview of some of the big changes that we've been working on and that are coming for 2017. So the way I'm going to do it is to quickly go through a little bit of what happened in the 2016 hurricane season, but with a preview of what would it have looked like from our products and warnings if it was 2017, because we're making a number of changes coming this June 1st. So, as an example, before Hurricane Hermine formed in the Gulf of Mexico, when it was trying to get its act together as it was approaching the Bahamas and Florida, what we were putting out there was the graphic on the left, our tropical weather outlook. And the area in orange near Florida going into the Gulf was the area where there could be the development of a tropical depression or a tropical storm. But we weren't yet writing our advisories. It wasn't yet classified a depression or a storm yet. But if it was 2017, you play that situation over again, because the formation was probably going to happen near land, and because the chances of formation were high within the next day or two, within our watch warning time frame, you'd see the graphic on the right most likely. Our first advisory would be issued sooner. We call it a potential tropical cyclone, and you'd see a track and intensity forecast from us, and you might see tropical storm watches and warnings go up. So the advisories from the Hurricane Center are going to be going up a little bit sooner in land-threatening cases within a day or two of threatening land. So that means if anything that anyone does is predicated on when the Hurricane Center is writing advisories or when we've got a number or a name on something, this could change that. It's not going to get a name until it's actually a tropical storm, but it would be something we would write advisories on. Then later on, what happened with Hermine is it became a tropical depression in reality, as you see on the left. And then when it was still a tropical depression, we issued advisories and then issued a hurricane watch for the northern Gulf Coast. So even when something is a tropical depression, we can put up a hurricane watch, and then it made landfall as a hurricane. But the bottom line here is the whole process, the suite of advisories, might have started a little bit sooner if this was 2017. Another product we're working on is these wind arrival timing prototypes. This might not affect you as much as some of the other changes, but we are always trying to be as transparent as possible about what product changes we are putting out there, because we never know who's going to be affected and needs to plan ahead for it. So this year, we're going to have this experimental graphic that shows when is the reasonable earliest time that winds of tropical storm force might arrive. That's what you see with the graphic on the left. It won't just be the timing of where the center of the storm or hurricane might be, as you see on the graphic on the right. This is to help folks in the public in emergency management get all their preparations done, including possibly evacuations, before the winds get too strong to do that safely. So that's another new product going experimental this year. Now the biggest changes, and this is another version of it with the full-blown wind speed probabilities, the chance of it happening at all underlaid behind it. So you can get from this chance of it happening, and then when would the winds start. So this is a really big deal for just about everybody trying to get their preparations done before a storm arrives. Can't wait for the eye to come on shore. The winds can go downhill before that. But now, the biggest changes that are coming this year and that we've already started working on is in the area of storm surge. Again, this is the salt water from the ocean being pushed ashore by the winds of the storm or hurricane onto normally dry ground. It's the main reason we have evacuation zones in this country. It's the main reason that folks like Brian tell folks to evacuate for the hurricane. In the case of Matthew last year, we did issue both of these graphics that you see on the screen. The graphic on the left shows you what the forecast track was and where the watches and warnings were in effect. But here's where we are dealing with wind and water separately, and I know this comes up in the insurance community as well, dealing with the effects of wind and water in claims and after the fact and so forth. In real time, we're going to be dealing with them more separately, because the winds of a hurricane and the water of the storm surge from the ocean don't always occur in the same place or at the same time. So what we've done is moved toward a paradigm where we have, in addition to the hurricane watches and warnings, we are going to have separate storm surge watches and warnings. Here's an example during Matthew of how this could play out. On the left, you see where the tropical storm and hurricane warnings were in effect. The tropical storm warning was down here in Dade County, and the hurricane warning was Broward County northward in the red. On the right, you see what was our prototype storm surge watch warning graphic last year. And what it shows is nothing south of West Palm Beach, but a storm surge warning in effect north of there, and then a storm surge watch farther north than that. So what that means, for example, is that in Broward County, there was a hurricane warning, but no prototype storm surge warning. We were telling the emergency managers and the public in Broward County this could be a hurricane force wind event for you, but we don't think storm surge is going to be a big part of the equation. And Broward County did not issue evacuations, but in Palm Beach County they did from the emergency managers. So we're separating how we handle the hurricane force wind and the storm surge watches and warnings. And the graphic on the right, while it was a prototype graphic last year, here in 2017, the National Weather Service is going operational with official storm surge watches and warnings. So if anything you do is predicated on hurricane watches and warnings being in effect, or storm surge watches and warnings being in effect, you're going to have both starting here in 2017. Here's an example of a subsequent advisory in Matthew where we extended things farther north. And note on the right that the storm surge warnings don't necessarily just go in effect for the immediate beachfront. You can even see parts of the St. Johns River in northeastern Florida lit up with a storm surge warning, the adjacent communities there. And we forecast how far inland from the beach the storm surge might go. So we're really trying to get local with these warnings to show people in any given community what hazard they could deal with. So we're not focusing so much on the storm itself or the category of the storm. We're focusing on where the individual wind and water hazards could occur. And that's how we're handling this in real time. Here is also a graphic that went operational in 2016, so it will continue in 2017. This is our potential storm surge flooding map, updated with each new advisory, that shows where the storm surge flooding could occur on normally dry ground and how high above that ground the water could get. And this is updated in real time. It's valid down to the community level, and it's primarily intended for emergency managers, decision makers trying to decide who needs to evacuate, but it's visible to everyone. And you might see communities that could get 3, 6, 9 feet of storm surge flooding in their community above ground, even if it's not a major hurricane. And possibly, in some cases, even when there's not a hurricane warning, where there's a storm surge warning in effect. So we really are separating out the hazards so that we don't get too focused on categorizing the hurricane, what the exact track is. We're focusing on where the hazards could occur. And we don't just deal with these issues in real time. We have a huge educational and outreach component of what we do at the Hurricane Center. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is I want there to be involvement with the insurance community, with our outreach and education, so that we say the right things to the public and to our media partners about insurance issues. It's one of the things we talk about on a hurricane awareness tour. This year it's on the East Coast with 2 stops in Florida, Orlando, and then here in Miami at Opa-locka. We'll be talking about 25 years since Hurricane Andrew. And when we do this, we take the Air Force C-130 Hurricane Hunters, the NOAA G4 jet that flies around the hurricane to help our track forecast get better, and we go city to city with the really cool planes and the even cooler pilots, and we bring the public out, media partners, emergency managers, and we hope that some of you will join in this event, because we're not just geeking out on the meteorology and talking about storm surge and rainfall and wind. We're having real-world conversations with the public about what they need to do to get ready for the next hurricane, including the topic of updating your insurance. I can have a 5-minute conversation with my dad about storm surge and winds. He lives up here in Broward County. He'll get bored after 5 minutes. I can have a 30-minute conversation with him about insurance, because I talked to him about what I did after I visited my insurance agent last year and how I was able to reduce my premium and increase my coverages by doing certain things. And he found that to be pretty interesting. And so if there's anything you're trying to get out to the public or anything you want us to be saying, when we have this very visible opportunity to interact with the public on hurricanes, when it comes to insurance or these other issues, we urge you to get involved and hope you'll be able to not only participate in these events, but engage with us on an ongoing basis on how we frame our messaging. And I know Brian and his colleagues will be interacting with us as we do this awareness tour, and look forward to working with our emergency managers as always during this upcoming hurricane season. So now I'm going to turn it over to Brian Kuhn, Director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, so he can give you his thoughts on various insurance issues. Brian.
Thanks, Rick. Morning, everybody. It took me 6 years to finally be able to talk about how we did during a hurricane, so I'm glad to be able to cover that today. You know, it's also testament to how well the state is prepared and ready for those kinds of storms when we forget about the 2 tropical storms that we also had last year. Frankly, they just kind of bounced off of us. And so we did have 2 tropical storms this last year, but the ones that we remember are Hurricanes Hermine and Matthew. Hermine and Matthew were, we did all right in those. There's some things that went really well. There's some things we need to work on a little bit. There was some luck along with us. Matthew stayed offshore enough that it didn't bring its most heavy winds and storm surge on board. And it really kind of helped set us up for future storm season. So I'm going to hit a few things that went well and things we're going to work on in the future. Number one is the way we did our evacuation, sheltering, returning citizens, and fuel availability all went well. Again, part of that was hard work and part of that was luck. We were able to tell people to get off of the barrier islands and move inland. We did not want them to move across the state. We didn't want them to move them out of state. We simply wanted them to get them away from that storm surge. And they listened. They got in the cars. They went in. They found friends to stay with. They went to hotels. Some of them stayed at shelters. We had about 25,000 or so Floridians sheltered during Hurricane Matthew. And then after the storm, we had our DOT inspectors get out there and take a look at the bridges on the barrier islands, inspect them, and allow people to return to their homes as quickly as possible. All of that went very smoothly. That's good because the next time we have to evacuate somewhere, those folks will have a positive memory of how that went, and they will be more likely to evacuate in the future. It was not 100% evacuation, though. There were a lot of folks who chose to remain behind, and that's something we're going to have to pay attention to next time. The only reason we're not talking about that is because nobody died as a result of staying there. However, if Matthew had come 30, 40, 50 miles closer to shore, they would have died, and we'd be taking a whole different tact on how that evacuation went. Fuel availability was okay in Matthew. Hermine, it wasn't an issue. In Matthew, it was okay. We only had spot outages across the state for fuel availability, meaning an individual station would run out, but there were no system-wide fuel issues. But I will tell you, it's very thin, that supply chain. We did everything we could at the governmental level to waive hours of service, waive overweight limits, and doing all of that just barely kept enough fuel in the system. The next time when we have a larger evacuation or there's some other dynamic that changes with that, fuel availability may in fact become an issue. So we're going to continue to take a look at that and make sure we message on that piece of it, that people understand what we're asking them to do, and that we've got enough resources in the system to get them to a place of safety. We implemented a new notification system this past year called Alert Florida, and many of the counties across the state are picking that up right now. That's a fantastic system to ensure that every Floridian has access to flood warnings, tornado warnings, hurricane warnings. Prior to the state implementing that system last March, it was done on a county-by-county basis. Some counties had it, some did not. Now we're leveling the playing field, making sure that everybody has access to that. We pushed out about 7 million messages during those two hurricanes, and we believe that was vital in ensuring that folks understood the severity of that situation and took the appropriate action. We also had great relationships with our media partners on that, and Mary Ellen, if you ever need me, you can call me on my cell phone. But they took the messaging that we were pushing out there and helped amplify it. And so we made sure that people understood, again, what we were asking them to do, and they did it for the most part. So we're pleased with that. Power restoration, by and large, went okay. If you live in Tallahassee, in some neighborhoods, you will disagree with me. But by and large, it went pretty well. I will tell you that the infrastructure improvements that have occurred since the 2004-2005 hurricane season paid off during those storms. Had the same magnitude of storm hit then, there would have been greater outages for a longer duration, but we did better this time. However, customer expectation has changed in the last 10 years as well. No longer can you tell somebody your power will be back up on in a week or two. Folks expect to know what day and what hour their power is going to come back on, and if it goes more than 24 to 48 hours, they will start blogging or tweeting about it angrily. And so the power companies have a new set of expectations to deal with in that situation, and we are working with them to help recognize that and find ways to make that more efficient, because frankly, the faster the power comes back on, the better everything becomes. And the government can get out of the business of sheltering and feeding people and get people back to normalcy a little bit more quickly. So we're taking a very heavy look at what is the right, appropriate level of investment from the government to help get the power companies back up online and get moving quickly as possible. And then finally, beach erosion was a big issue. The storm Matthew, again, I'm covering it because it had the greater impacts. Volusia and Brevard counties had more of the higher winds, but Flagler, St. John's, Duval, and a little bit of Nassau County had the greater beach erosion as a result of that storm. Both of those storms were presidentially declared, and there will be some FEMA reimbursement for that beach erosion, but not enough to cover that, and so they'll be looking at other ways to help restore the beaches in those communities, and that's vitally important because those beaches are the buffer between the ocean and the people who live there. And so we've got to make sure that we're focused on getting that sand back in place and have a long-term strategy on dealing with the beaches in the state of Florida with regards to those storms. I want to talk about flood insurance a little bit. I talked about that last year, and previous speaker talked about it as well. This year it's going to be reauthorized in Congress. Remains a big issue. Last year I talked about the division's effort with regard to the community rating system of the National Flood Insurance Program, which is how we help communities improve their resilience to flood. That program results in reduced premiums for the policyholders in those communities, so everybody wins. The community gets better, the policyholder pays less dollars. Hopefully that will incentivize more people to buy flood insurance and be covered. However, we continue to fight a losing battle. We keep making good progress. This past year we got Monroe County into the system, we got Key West into the system, a few other cities and counties, and we're making steps to do the rest of the state as well. We did over 150 community assistance visits in this last year to get communities in there. But the number of flood insurance policies in the state continues to decline. Right now we're just over 1.7 million flood insurance policies in the state. 4 years ago that was closer to 2.1 million. So we've lost 14% of the flood insurance policies in the state in the last 4 years. You heard it earlier, we were about 40% of the National Flood Insurance Program. Actual, we're closer to about 35% of the flood insurance program at this point. That has the result of that, you will see after storms like Hurricane Hermine and Matthew. The numbers on those storms, for individuals who applied for individual assistance for Hermine, those are people who get a FEMA grant because of whatever, they didn't have appropriate levels of insurance, they have the right level of income. About 2,000 people got grants from FEMA, 2,000 households from FEMA. Average payout was $4,196. 2,400 people got flood insurance claims. Average payout was $41,823. So if you do not have flood insurance, you get about a tenth of what your flood insurance claim would have been in that situation. For Matthew, it's even starker. 6,600 families got individual assistance grants from FEMA, about $2,900, so even less than Hermine. The average payout for the 5,330 policies that were paid out was $41,899. So, for example, those 6,600 families in Matthew who did not have flood insurance but had damage, they received $38,000 less than their neighbor across the street who did have flood insurance. And so that's going to take that family a longer time to recover. If they recover, it's going to take that community a longer time to recover. It's going to put a greater strain on the charitable organizations and nonprofits in that community. The property values are going to go down, and that's going to continue to happen until we figure out what's the right way to get flood insurance back to where it needs to go in the state. And so we're going to continue pushing on with that. Urge again all of you to be involved with that effort as the reauthorization comes up this year, because in the absence of the appropriate flood insurance, Florida will have a harder and harder time recovering from future hurricanes and floods. And then finally I want to talk about an opportunity. Last year I may have mentioned as well, FEMA has been working on with Congress how to reduce the cost of disasters to the federal government. In December, they released an advance notice of proposed rulemaking highlighting their deductible plan. I think you all know how deductible works, obviously. In this plan, states would have a deductible based on their risk profile and their state's financial status that would have to be met before the federal government pitched in on those dollars. And so they've highlighted how that would all work in a 101-page proposed rule. I urge you all to take a look at it because in addition to the deductible, they propose that there be credits associated with that as well. So a state can buy down the deductible through certain actions. There are 3 things in there that I think would impact you all directly. One of them is credit for mitigation programs. They envision a 3-to-1 return, so if a state invests $1 million in mitigation efforts in the state, that would save them $3 million on their deductible. They propose a percentage buy down for the appropriate level of insurance coverage, and so any insurance that the state took out would be then taken off on the deductible side. And then finally, the state would receive a percentage buy down of the deductible for an increase in building codes. And so if the state stepped up its building codes, then they would again buy down their deductible. All 3 of those things would impact your bottom line. So I encourage you to take a look at this. Have your smart people with calculators work through it all and provide detailed feedback on it. It's on the Federal Register. The comments are due by April 2nd. There will be lots of negative comments about this. I will tell you that. I will tell you that many emergency managers across the country will probably be opposed to the idea simply because they like the way it is today. and they view this as additional work for them. However, the finance side of this thing, I think, does make sense for you all. It makes sense for the state of Florida, and you definitely want to make your ideas known on this, because if this doesn't go through, then you leave it up to Congress, who may change the way disasters are funded by changing the threshold or the cost share methodology or others. So again, take a look at that. Comments are due by April 2nd. We're well poised for this upcoming hurricane season. We've got a great relationship with the National Hurricane Center. We're taking those lessons learned from this past season and incorporating them with an eye towards the fact that things went well this past hurricane season, but you change one or two dynamics. You change that storm by a few miles, you put one more accident on the interstate, you change the amount of fuel available by just 1 or 2 percentage points, and you could have a whole drastically different outcome. So we're keeping an eye on those things and get ready for the upcoming hurricane season. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you've got, Lori. Thanks.